Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Brian and myself are going to cover a handful of reasons why your legs aren't growing, something Brian and I know very much about because we struggled for many years, and it is something that we would often talk about with our own frustrations. So before we get into that, Brian, what's the latest with you?
What is the latest? We just recorded with Eric Helms a couple days ago. That episode just dropped. So as of us recording this right now, this moment, that episode dropped. So make sure you go check that out on all the platforms. It hit super hard. Eric came and delivered. Great conversation. In my world, my Instagram is still hacked as of this moment. I'm still keeping hope alive, but also kind of in the mindset of acceptance. A worst case scenario, I don't get my account back. I have a new account, and I just need to kind of move forward from there and keep putting out content and talking about things that are important to me, and nothing else really changes from there. So still waiting on Instagram. It is what it is. And then I guess regarding my diet and training and stuff like that, body weight was super down. I think I even mentioned on the last episode that I dropped something like 4 pounds in 10 days. And I'm actually really glad that it's kind of stabilized since then, because that was just a little too much for me. And I'm up about a pound and a half from where it plummeted to at the end of those 10 days. And so I'm really happy about that. I'm also really happy that I don't feel depleted like I was at the end of those 10 days. I literally didn't feel I felt small and flat. I hadn't been training, right? I'd taken a week off, and there were all these kind of cascade of effects that impacted why 4 pounds were down in 10 days. But coming back to eating, I've actually been eating more than I've anticipated. The last few days I've been in the 2,600 to 3,000 calorie range, which is really my maintenance, slightly above maintenance maybe.
Probably.
But I just kind of felt like I needed it. So I've been doing that. And then at some point I will decide that it's time to go back down to 23 or 2,400 and dig for the last, I guess I have about 5 pounds left to go because I'm at 187 now. So I'd like to get to 182. That's kind of my goal, just putting it out there goal. And then as I get close, I can kind of adjust whether maybe it's 183 or 181 or something like that. But it's definitely, I'm 13 pounds into a potentially 18-pound diet. So well over halfway, and that feels good. It doesn't seem too hard yet. Regarding training, this has been the craziest thing. I just put a post up on my Instagram yesterday about this, but I took my week off. And prior to the week off of training, I was stuck at 580 pounds for 8 reps on my hack press, just consistently every week. It was 580 for 8, and then 580 for 8, and then 580 for 8, and for months and months and months. And I was just I'm dieting, so what else can I really expect? At least I'm not losing strength, During that period of time, I was trying to train my legs every 4 days. I was of this mindset that, as soon as they're no longer sore and they feel recovered, I should train them again. So essentially, the day after they'd be a little sore. The day after that, they would be sore if you flex them or punch them, but you wouldn't feel it walking around. And then the day after that, there would be no soreness, and then I'd train the next day. But it's weird because I guess it's possible that I wasn't actually recovered, even though there was no soreness. I may have needed a little bit of extra time. So what happened was I finished my week off and I went into my first leg session, and I got a really easy 10 reps. And that was not really surprising. I mean, it was surprising because I hadn't progressed in so long, but I justified it easily, as the fatigue had flushed and I was finally able to manifest fitness, right? And then this week, okay, no. So after that, I changed my leg training frequency because I was maybe my legs aren't recovered. I just kind of threw that idea out into the world. And I switched my leg training up. So I took my hamstring work and I do it on one day, and then 2 to 3 days later, I do my quad work, and then 2 to 3 days after that, I do my ham work, and then 2 to 3 days after that, quad work again. So it ends up being every 5 to 6 days that I'm training the same muscle group now instead of every 4 days. And so I come back into my next hack press session, and this time I got 12 reps. So it went from 8 before the week off to 10 the week after the week off to 12 the next week. And that's just insane to me because I literally hadn't made progress in months, and now I've added 4 reps. So I don't exactly know what to think of it, but it's awesome. And I'm still dieting, and I am training my legs less often. So mentally, that helps too because, when you're training every fourth day, it's like, oh, it's leg day again. It's so hard. Like you get this anxiety kind of. But every sixth day, it's like, I'm ready. I'm like excited, So it's kind of even a different attitude going into it, and I don't know how much of an effect that has too. So for whatever it's worth, I'm gonna continue with this frequency and just kind of see how long I can ride this progress train, and then I can kind of gather my thoughts and reassess at that point.
I like how you said that the anxiety you get when it's leg day, and I definitely get that, especially on like for example yesterday I was just like a little bit low energy. All right, I just wrapped up a launch for coaching, which is just a lot, just time consuming. I'm on lots and lots of calls, lots of work to do. I'm just a little bit lower energy, and I know like, hey, I can't train on Tuesdays because I just have too much work to do in the podcast and stuff like that. And then on Sundays I go hiking, so it's like I need to train on that Monday so I don't throw off my schedule really bad. And it's just like yesterday was a Monday was a leg day, and I was just like, damn it, like because it's hard, it's just like more mentally taxing. And I wonder, like you said, if it's just kind of like one of those recovery things. I also like how you said about switching or splitting up hamstring and quad days, because for example, like I do like RDLs, right, is like my lengthened position hamstring movement, and then I go right into hack squats, and it's just like it's taxing. It's like,
Yeah.
it's taxing on like my soul, right? Because like pushing the RDLs, it's difficult, right? You're like shaking at the end and stuff like that. And then I'm like, okay, now I have like 2 sets to warm up on hack squat, and then I need to push myself really hard there. And it's just like, it's defeating is like kind of the feeling. And I was thinking if like, I've been tossing around this idea of like maybe running like a front back type of a split or something like that, where just the legs, like the legs are the hardest things you really train, right? You can push your chest really hard and it'll get like sore and stuff, but you don't get that just central kind of fatigue over your entire being that you get from like pushing RDLs really hard, or the pendulum squat or the hack squat, or any type of squatting movement. So it has been something I've been thinking about splitting up. So it is cool to hear that you have recently done that.
Yeah, I've never in my whole life of training ever done a routine where I split quads and hams. I've done a routine where I put, what was it? I did quads and chest and shoulders on one day. So like you kind of said, it's like an anterior program, and then I put back, biceps, and hamstrings on the other day. So I've done a routine like that, but I've never had a routine where the sole focus of the day is like, this is a quad day or this is a hamstring day. And it's actually really cool for a lot of kind of what you mentioned. So I have 3 main movements on each day. And so like on quad day, there's a big squat style movement, like a pendulum or a hack or something like that. There's an isolation movement, like a leg extension, and then I finish with the single leg movement. So the single leg movement, even though it's brutal and it's hard, it's not like it's your primary overloading movement for the day. It's like almost just a finisher. So the amount of weight that you're using on it isn't nearly as high, or it isn't quite as damaging and fatiguing as it would be if you were doing it first. So I have kind of those 3 different movement patterns, but there's really only one that just sucks your soul, right?
Exactly.
And then on hamstring day, it's kind of the same idea. I have like a leg curl, an RDL, or like a good morning hip extension. Sometimes I'll do a day where like some hip extension, some good morning, and then one day's just RDL. And then I usually do another leg curl after that, which is still a leg curl, and some glute work. So it would be like a cast glute bridge, or I just added in the glute focus leg press where the feet are up high and narrow, and you're kind of just only using like a partial range of motion to stay in the glute. But stuff like that, like even though it's using the hack press machine, it's using it in a very different manner than the way that it's being used when it's like your primary overloaded movement. So I really like the freedom, maybe freedom's the wrong word, but the way in which that split allows you to put your primary focus into that one area, because it really is like when you have an RDL and a hack squat, even if you think that you can put equal efforts into both, you're probably going to put more effort into the one that's first. And honestly, it makes sense that you put RDL first, because trying to do an RDL and embrace your midline after doing hack squats would be wildly rough.
Yeah, whenever I do the RDL, it has to be like the first thing, or maybe I do like calves or something before, but like it has to be, or else I'll be straight up, I'm gonna half-ass it 100% if I don't.
Do you do like a mechanical tension type set of leg curls before your RDLs ever?
I don't do a mechanical tension type set, but what I will do is I'll go get on it, right? And then I will do like 6 reps on like a very light weight, move it down 1, do 6 reps, move it down 1, and just to like get blood flow back in there. So, or not back, but like get blood flow in there. So there is like warm, but I won't, I do that just to really warm them up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that approach works too. That's actually, I think I've heard something similar on John Meadows.
That's where I got it from, John Meadows. Yeah.
It's but perfect. I think on his, he takes the 6s all the way until he can't do 6 anymore.
Yeah, he does. I generally will not do that, especially before an RDL.
Yeah. Nice. I like that. All right, cool. Well, what's going on in your world? Any updates for the people?
No, I mean, training's going, or I said no, and then I go into talking about it. Training's going really, really well, which is fantastic. I wrapped up my diet, a couple days ago. And what's really, really fun is just like each week I go in and I'm like, man, I got, 14 reps last week. I don't think I can do more. And I'll do like 16 or 17. So I'm just very happy with the progress right now. And now I know it's going to continue because I'm just literally adding more food every single week, which is fun. Yesterday I was on the pendulum squat, and I instead took the approach of, instead of trying to add more reps on the first set, I was like, I'm going to match the first set because I really want to be able to get 10 on my third set. And I had failed that the 2 weeks prior. So I kind of took a little bit of Brian Miner's double dynamic progression approach, and I was actually able to add a rep on each set 2 and 3, which is really, really cool. And the third one was like a full out, like balls to the wall. It felt absolutely awful. The second one it was very, very challenging, but the first one was like, I was like, okay, like there's 12 reps. Like I'm good with that. Like I probably have 2 more. But it was pretty cool. I generally I found with myself, I can push my first set almost always and beat reps, but then I like kind of blow my load on the first set, and then I'm done for sets 2 and 3. And I'm like struggling to match reps, cause I just pushed the first set way too hard. So it was cool to kind of take a little bit of a different approach there. But I mean, no, things are going great here. Like obviously energy levels are improved, with food coming up. My weight is still, I'm about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds up from my bottom. So I was like 192.3 or something like that today. But things are going really, really good. I'm approaching that like 194 to 190, like somewhere in the 194s mark, which is where I have a picture from like December 2019. Yeah, which was like, I think like the best I ever looked. So I'm really interested to see like when I get to that weight, like how I'm going to compare now, a year and a half later or whatever. So pretty cool. It's pretty cool that time horizon is very near, within 2 weeks probably.
Was that picture from 2019 on the way up or on the way down?
On the way up.
Nice.
Yep.
So it's comparing apples to apples. I like
exactly.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, should we talk about the topic for the day?
Let's talk about it.
Cool. You want to introduce?
Yeah. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of like, I think we have like 6 or 7 reasons why that are probably very likely, if you find yourself in this scenario, why your legs aren't growing or why you think your legs aren't growing. So a little bit of backstory here. When Brian and I were, training a lot together, when I was a member at Brian's CrossFit gym, and we kind of started getting a little bit outside of our goals being CrossFit related and more just into like feeling good, physique type stuff. We found ourselves with a lot of similarities, right? We're about the same exact size. Our weights are usually within a few pounds of each other. We have like good back development, like Brian's shoulders are obviously massive compared to mine, but we both found that like our legs were just like significantly smaller than everything else on our body. And it was frustrating because we squatted a lot. We squatted often. We were roughly pretty strong for, being CrossFit at, 2013, 2014. We had over 400 pound high bar back squat PRs, but like our legs just didn't grow. And then for both of us, it kind of became this mission as we transitioned into more hypertrophy style training, to kind of bring those up And it's been an uphill battle for me for like years now. But what I'm happy to report is like my legs are finally growing. They have grown. And that's one thing I'd say I'm most proud of coming out of this most recent diet I just wrapped up is like, I was afraid my legs were going to like disappear again. And they really haven't. They're probably the best not even probably, they're the best they've ever looked. Like feel very confident saying my legs are larger now at, 191 pounds than they were when I was 227, and that's damn near 40-pound difference body weight. So I'm very pumped about that. And we're going to cover some of the reasons that we've, found that we kind of fell into these traps and that you might find into yourself. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just have a question. Have you measured your legs?
Not since probably like October, but I have the, what is it called? Like the measuring, it's not a measuring tape, but it's like a measuring tape. I don't know the correct
Yeah, it's just like a
terminology.
fabric measuring tape or something.
Yeah, I have one of them. I have to find out where I have it packed with our, lifestyle in my suitcase or whatever. But I should be, that is a good thing. I should give myself a run there and see what it's at.
Dave McConey's got me all up on this. Every time that I send him a picture of anything, he's like, I don't care. What's your measurement? That's like the only thing he cares about. He's like, pictures are deceiving. What's your measurement? So now I'm always trying to remind myself, even though I'm just like you, like it's somewhere in my house and like I don't know where it is and I need to go find it. So yeah, we have a list of 6 or 7 things for why your legs might not be growing. And Aaron and I both agreed that probably the number one most important one on the list is that training legs is freaking hard. It's so much more painful and less enjoyable than training chest or arms. And you really don't like see it happening as you're doing it. I mean, it's like you can watch your arms in a mirror and you can like see and feel them working. But when you're doing a hack squat, you're just trying not to die. So it's really just survival. And we'll get to this, but I think that part of that is that because it's so painful, it's almost even more difficult to like truly connect with the legs. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that just like very recently, I'm talking about within the last like 2 maybe months or so. I was always one of those people, like I just have a great connection with my chest. I don't know why. I don't even really enjoy training chest, but I can do like 2 warm-up sets and my chest is already like blown up, like pump, I can feel it good. For legs, I'd have to do like 5 sets on the leg extension and then like, drop sets and stuff like that to get like a pump and like stimulus, like where I can like feel that I'm actually like doing that with my legs. It took me, that was for like years. Only recently have I been able to like yesterday, I said I was on the pendulum squat. After that first set that I pushed hard, like I had to sit down between because my legs were like so blown up. And I did, 3 warm-up sets of 5 reps with light weights. And then I went into my 12 reps at my first, my working weight. And I've finally been able to like connect and contract them properly and push with the right muscles and not let my back and, hips take over type of thing. And I think it's one of those things, you need to spend some time learning that or creating those connections, subjectively. And it's hard to do because it's so like displeasurable. I do think there's some weight that carries for sure.
Yeah, I think this even goes back to some of the conversation we had with Eric last week in that like when you're doing a squat, like he was right in that if you just go down to the bottom and then you stand back up again, like you're going to do knee extension, like your quads are going to work. But like subjectively, there's actually something happening down there where you can force that tension into your quads and keep it there, but it's god awful when you do it. Like it has the same type of just gut punch feeling as like when you're at like a failure set of sit-ups and you just like feel like your core rotting. Like that's the type of feeling that you get if you stay in your quads at the bottom of a squat versus doing what I did for years and years and years, which was getting to the bottom and letting my glutes and adductors take over, essentially dropping my hips further back so that the tension goes off my quads because it was so painful to do that. And so I still don't exactly know how much of a difference that really makes, But I believe that if we were able to test this, that we would find that it makes some type of difference. And I think that you'd probably agree with that.
Yeah, and I think this is a part that we're gonna cover a little bit later, but so many people, and this includes myself for a long time, I'm like, okay, well, I'm at parallel, I'm below parallel, like I check the box, right? There's nothing else I need to do. And I guess depending on what you're looking for, that does check the box. But if your goal is like quad hypertrophy, there's a lot more you can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, and I remember coming back to like when I would do like, when I would look at training programs and stuff before, and they would have like squats for sets of 8, like, no way, I'm stopping at like 5, right? Because it was like squats of 8, that's cardio. And is it cardio? Like, no, right? It's not, but it kind of is. Like when I come off the hack squat or anything like that, like my chest is fucking pounding. I'm very out of breath. I need to sit down and stuff like that. Where if you do like a set of, 10 on the lat pull down, like it's challenging, but you're not like, gasping for air. You don't have that like whole body, doesn't feel great type of feeling. It's just a completely different feeling. It does not feel great to push a hack squat, a pendulum squat, a front squat, something like that for sets of 8 to 12. It's an objectively non-pleasurable feeling.
Yeah, I think there's there's a certain level of determination and grit that you have to train legs, especially in hypertrophy rep ranges. Not to take anything away from like powerlifting, but every time that I've ever done like a 3x3 or a 3x5 or something like that, you just kind of set your mind to it and you do it, but it doesn't really actually hurt like during it. You just kind of like do it and then it's done. Like you have to prepare and brace and get like mentally psyched up, and there's a whole mental side of it that's different than hypertrophy training. But when you're like in it and you're doing a set of like 12 to 15 or 10 reps on like a bilateral squat pattern movement, you almost have to go in search of that pain. Like you can't try to shy away from it. You have to go looking for it. Like how can I move my body in such a way that I drive more tension to an area that already hurts like shit and I don't want to. Everything in my body is telling me to shift the tension to my glutes, but I have to like not do that and keep driving further into the muscle. And that's the determination that a lot of people just don't have because it sucks and it's painful.
Agreed. It wasn't until I like really committed and was like, this is a goal, right? I'm happy with my physique, except for like my quad development. And it's been this uphill battle. It wasn't until I was like, okay, I know this is going to, and by painful, we mean like, you have that like lactic acid feeling build up in the muscle, effect, the metabolite effect in the muscle, not like your joints are painful type of deal.
Right.
If anything, I would say this type of training is actually beneficial for your joints because you're taking them through full range of motion and generally using a more light to moderate load. My joints feel better than they ever have in this since training this way. And yeah, it's just I just committed to it, and there was that like bridge period where I was miserable all the time because it was like a new feeling, kind of like going back to CrossFit, right? That first day when you go to CrossFit, there's some people who are like, I'm hooked, I'm never gonna leave. And personally, I told myself I was never gonna fucking go back because it was so miserable. But then like you bridge that kind of purgatory area, and then you become more accustomed and comfortable with what that awful feeling feels like. So it is slightly less awful because you've been there before. It is kind of like a prereq for achieving what you want out of it type of deal. So it does get easier in my opinion in that regard.
Yeah, no, for sure. You're more like mentally prepared for what you have coming.
Exactly. Anything else on that first one?
No, I think we crushed that one.
Cool. And number 2, we briefly alluded to this when we were talking about the first one, but your reps are just too low. You could be potentially confusing strength, what is probably optimal for hypertrophy. For example, I will have I had 2 guys actually in this round of my coaching that I just launched who came to me from like doing like 5x5 stuff. They're like, oh yeah, I'm training, 5x5. And I explained, I'm like, okay, there's nothing like wrong with that. But if your goal is physique and hypertrophy, we're going to move a little bit into more hypertrophy specific rep ranges, a little bit higher rep ranges. And that kind of goes to what we were alluding with, like doing like sets of, 3 to 5 on a squat is generally like very acceptable. And then if you're telling people, hey, we're going to do like sets of 10 or, 8 to 12, it's like, whoa, why are we, that's awful. Why are we doing that much? Well, generally it's been found to be probably more optimal than the lower rep ranges for the specific goal of hypertrophy. What do you have to add to that one?
Yeah, we covered a study in one of the early episodes on this show. It was an episode where we went over a bunch of studies. I want to say it was like episode 7, 8, or 9, something like that. But it compared, I think it was a Schoenfeld study, but they compared 10 sets of 3 to 3 sets of 10. And they got similar levels of hypertrophy because they both essentially did 30 reps. But the group that did 10 sets of 3 had like all sorts of joint pain, and they were like really fatigued subjectively. Like on their question form, they were like, oh my God, this is awful. Like I can't continue with this type of training. And then the group that did 3 by 10 was like, oh yeah, this was great. Like, I got great results. It didn't take that long. My body feels wonderful. So I think that kind of goes to show that, like, yes, you can get hypertrophy in lower rep ranges, but you have to match the total amount of volume. And when the reps are so low that they don't actually count as a hard set, it starts to become ambiguous. So like in the range of, 6 to 30 reps is for hypertrophy. Yeah, that's true. Like a set of 6 to failure or a set of 30 to failure is probably pretty close. A set of 30 probably would make you feel a lot worse. So I see, value, at least in compound movements, on erring on the side of 6, but that's still not 3. And then I think as you get below 6, you really do have to add volume and add sets to make up for those reps that you miss and that time under tension. And then you do have all of those compounding effects associated from that study, like the joint fatigue and just the overall systemic fatigue and all of that stuff. So I think it's pretty obvious across the majority of research right now that if you're going to make hypertrophy your goal and you want to increase the size of your legs, that squatting in the 6 to 12 rep range is probably good. And, doing isolation leg movements in the 8 to 25 rep range is probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I think we're pretty good on that one.
Cool.
Number 3, you're not using movements that are advantageous for your limb lengths. This was probably the number one culprit for Brian and I. I used to be very subscribed to this notion that like all you need is to back squat and back squat often, and you'll have these like massive legs, because I read, old Testosterone Nation and things like that said that. So that's what I did. I got decently strong. Like I said, my best 1 rep high bar back squat is 425. My legs never really grew. And realistically, like I have a lanky build. I'm 5'11", very long femurs, and I have very good ankle dorsiflexion, like much better than the average person. And even at that rate, like I can't squat with a upright torso with a barbell on my back, just how my limb lengths work. And through years of training, how I had different performance in different things, like my posterior chain is much stronger than like my quads type of deal. So whenever I would squat, once I would reach a certain load, my knees would shift back into a more vertical position, taking my quadriceps out of that fully lengthened position, and my hips and back would take over more of the load because they were stronger to move it. And when you're balancing a barbell on your back, that the balance is a massive part of it. So I did that for a number of years and I didn't see much progress. And then eventually I learned, became a little bit wiser, and started using things like the hack squat, leg press, pendulum squat, Bulgarian split squat, Smith machine squat, some of these things that remove that balance aspect and allow me to put myself in a more advantageous position, allowed me to reach a fully lengthened position in the bottom with my knees out over my toes, with my heel flat on the ground still, and lo and behold, started getting much better tension in my quads and was able to reduce my loads a lot, check my ego at the door, and my legs started growing. So Brian, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I can't really back squat super well high bar either. So you've seen me, if you follow my stories and stuff over the last year and change, working on trying to find different variations of back squat that allow me to continue to prioritize the quads, such as elevating the heels, using a safety squat bar, things like that. If these are tools that we had in the CrossFit days, like if we even knew that elevating the heels was a tool to use versus being a scale for people with shitty ankle dorsiflexion, because that's really how we used it, right? Like it'd be some person that comes in and they don't squat very well, so you're like, oh, you should totally just elevate your heels, it fixes everything. And it does for a lot of people. Like if the issue is ankle dorsiflexion, like it probably does. But if we knew about that back then, that's a tool that we could have used, and it would have obviously changed the back squat. So we wouldn't have been back squatting 400 pounds for reps anymore. But even if we're doing 275 for reps with the heels elevated or whatever it is, that is giving more attention to the areas where we want to drive it. So if your limb lengths are not great for a back squat, that's not a big deal. Make the back squat better so that it fits you, or find a machine that fits you. But trying to fit, what's the saying, a round peg into a square hole, that doesn't produce great results. And then, what was the other thing I was going to say?
While you think about it, I have one little thing to add there. Yep. Even once I did become a little bit aware of this, there were a few times where I would attempt to make the barbell back squat like advantageous and with these new things I learned, and I would push it at higher rep ranges. And what I would always find is my lower back would fatigue before my quads would, even with all this new information and stuff. And some of it's that moment arm, right? Based on your limb length and your torso length and that sort of thing. And even, like I said, when I did have this new information that I applied, I still wasn't able to get what I could out of like a hack squat or a Smith machine squat, where I didn't have to balance it with my back and that moment arm becoming like a limiting factor for me.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more. Like I went out and bought a pendulum squat machine when I already had like a hack leg press, right? Like I clearly value what the machine offers. And it really came, like the need in my head came for the pendulum after trying all of those squat variations and realizing that they were good. They were significantly better than the back squat in its natural form for me. But like a lot of the same things would still happen. So if I'm like 3 RIR or something like that, I can keep that perfect form with a safety squat bar and with my heels elevated. I can do perfect squats and stay in my quads and like really fight through the sticking point without compromising. But as I get to like 2, 1, and potentially to that rep where you get a little shaky in the middle, there would just be natural compensations occurring. And even if it only looked subtly like there was anything happening on video, it felt like there was a lot happening in my body. And so being able to switch to a pendulum squat or a hack squat, when I get through that sticking point, it's 100% because there's tension driving through my quads that are pushing through that sticking point, and not some internal shifts into like my glutes or into my hips and low back and stuff like that are compensating. So I think that all of this kind of comes down to just making sure that whatever movement is best for you, or how you select the movement that is best for you, should be based on which movements allow you to stay in the muscle that you're trying to work without shifting out of it and compromising your form.
Exactly. And that's the real reason why those movements and exercises I said are great, because they stabilize your back for you.
Yep, for sure.
Cool. Ready to move to the next one?
Yeah, so the next one, very straightforward. Your rep cadence sucks. Yeah, this is a good one, because in the pursuit of hypertrophy, we don't want to use momentum at the bottom position. I guess if we're talking about a squat style movement or whatever, we don't want to be bouncing out of the hole. We don't want to use the stretch reflex that you see the Olympic lifters and the power lifters use, because their goal is to get up with the weight. They don't care what muscles are getting the weight up. They want to get up. So a stretch reflex is something that helps them achieve this. In the pursuit of hypertrophy, if you're not going to pause at the bottom, you better slow yourself down as you get to the bottom so that you change direction without bouncing off of your calves. So that would be one way that I see cadence affecting things. I think an obvious one is an explosive eccentric. Like we should be exploding up as fast as we can to drive as much tension as possible into the fast twitch muscles. One thing I want to say that I think might make sense to people is I like to think as the lowering phase as being the rep. And then I get to the bottom after driving so much tension into the rep as I'm lowering. I'm just like, how much tension can I drive into my quads over this period that I'm lowering myself down? And then the whole idea of getting back up is just, let me get back up as quickly as I can so I can do another actual lowering phase. So if you try to approach your training where the lowering phase is the most important part and then the concentric is just a way for you to do another lower, then I think that kind of changes the perspective of the way that you think about the way that you approach your cadence in general, and should have like a really solid positive effect on the outcome of your training.
I love that. The real reason I love it is you alluded to something that I was going to bring up, but explained it much better. The kind of the stereotypical thing that you see in the gym with the hack squat, right? For example, is there's a stopper at the bottom. And you see people load like 4 or 5 plates on each side, and they put their legs in a advantageous position to move weight, and then they don't control the eccentric, and they just slam the hack squat off the stopper at the bottom, and then they like drive up, right, and then they slam it off the bottom again, and there's a whole half of the rep that they're not doing anything. They're not controlling the weight, and they're using that as like a false bottom, but that is where you create all of that tension. In a movement, that's where it's a length and overload movement, and you're basically removing that length and overload by slamming it off the stopper at the bottom. So really controlling the eccentric, like Brian said, treating that as the rep, and then the standing up portion is really just how you reset to start your next rep. Controlling it, right, not using that rebound, and just driving with the correct musculature, and that will really, really change things for you. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things I've changed in my training in the last like two-ish years is I have like a standard rep cadence that is probably like a 2 count eccentric on pretty much, I don't want to say everything because I'm sure there is something that I don't, but I've really controlled my eccentrics on every single movement, and that's turned out really well for me.
Yeah, it's just a way that you can get back to the lengthened position again. It's like, get me to the lengthened position, hold as much tension as you can, and then let's get out of there as quick as possible so that we can get back to the lengthened position again. And that's kind of the way I think about lifting now, whereas I think for many, many years I thought about it as the rep up being the thing. And so it was just like, who cares about the way down, because it's really the way up that like is the hard part, right? But really, if you can make the way down really, really hard if you want to. I want to talk about one other thing regarding cadence that I think is really, really important and often missed. And that is people not having consistent breathers at the top of their rep. The top of the rep is the period of the rep where there's pretty much no tension on your legs. You're just standing there recovering. So what I would love to see is that on your first rep, you stand up and you take 1 breath, and then you go back down. And then on your 10th rep, you stand up and you take 1 breath and you go back down. And when you reach failure or whatever your target RIR is, that is your target RIR without extending your breathers. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've watched a set of someone post in one of my Facebook groups, and it's like I'm watching it, and I'm trying to, in my head, determine like, okay, when are they going to like rack the bar, blah, blah, blah. So they'll do like 6 and it's like a grinder. And then they stand there for like 7 seconds and they do 7 and it's a grinder. And then they stand there for like 10 seconds and then they do 8 and it's even more of a grinder. And I'm like, no, God, please, no, don't do another rep, you know? So I really, really encourage people to make sure that your breathers are consistent rep to rep. And if you cannot execute another rep without extending your breather, then you've reached failure. That's the end of your set. Like, you don't need to create all that fatigue just standing there so that you can do another rep that doesn't really even have that much tension on the muscle that you're trying to train. So that's kind of one of my pet peeves, but it's also something that I think is really, really important. And I'm going to make an Instagram post on that.
That's a good one. That is something, admittedly, I I am a little bit flexible with myself for some leg stuff. For example, yesterday on the pendulum squat, I try and do that one breath, right? And I don't lock it fully out because I want to keep it there. I try to not even really take a full breath because I want to keep as much tension on my legs as I can. Once I get into that like one RAR, I will give myself like 2 breaths. I try and get like 2 quick big breaths and go again, because those are where like those last. Like I'll have like a grinder, but I do not like, I don't sit there if I'm taking 3 or anything like that. Like I'm cutting it. Plus, I don't think it will really help me. I think I'm truly failed at that point. I don't think I'll get the rep. But yeah, that is a really important point.
Yeah, I think as long as you consistently execute it the same way, where like say you get like your 10th rep with no pauses and then you take 2 breaths before your 11th rep or before your last rep, whatever your last rep is, and you know every week you're like, okay, I'm just going to go until 1 rep from when I think I can't do anymore, and then I'm going to pause for 2 breaths and then I'm going to do 1 more rep or something like that, then at least you have consistent information. But when people are using breathers as a way to extend sets and fake progress, feign progress, I think that's where it kind of becomes an issue.
Yes, correct. And I always follow the same thing. So the consistency is there.
Yep, totally. Well, I think this kind of plays into the next one as well, which is you're selling yourself way too short. You're cutting your sets at 3 or 4 or whatever RIR and not really ever knowing what it feels like to get to 1 or even 2 RIR, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to that first point where it's just freaking hard. It's not pleasurable, really. And you think that like, okay, the rep has slowed slightly, or I'm just trying so hard. It is like such an effort that has to be it, right? I'm close to failure. When realistically, unless you've ever pushed yourself safely on something like a hack squat, a pendulum squat, something where you don't have like any real risk of injury with a technical failure, you just don't know. For example, and this is what really kickstarted my thought for this one yesterday. On my 3rd set of the pendulum squat, I really wanted 10 reps because I had failed at 9 for the 2 previous weeks and I wanted some redemption. When I hit the 4th rep on that 3rd set, the thought creeped into my head. I was like, fuck, this is moving really slow. Like there's no way I'm going to make this. And that was only 4 reps in. And then I continued, and then I proceeded to do another 6 reps successfully after that thought had creeped in. So this is a really good example. So if you're finding yourself in this scenario and maybe you're maybe you're scared to fail, and that's perfectly viable, film your set. See what your reps look like when that thought creeps into your head. And I guarantee when you watch that video, you're going to go, oh, holy shit, that rep moved really fast. There's a dichotomy between the subjective perception of how your reps feel and then when you watch a video of yourself, how they look from like, a 3rd person point of view. That is something I found incredibly true for myself. Anything with that from you, Brian?
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed that. I just want to talk a little bit about programming because I think that I don't agree with a lot of what Mike Israetel says, and I do agree with a lot of what he says. I think he's very logic based and he's a smart dude. And in the way that he kind of prescribes training is that he has a mesocycle start at somewhere around 3 to 4 reps from failure. And then he has you add weight every week or reps, one of the two, with the idea that eventually if you just keep adding weight or reps by week 4, 5, or 6, you're going to run into failure. And so I think one really cool aspect about that is that it ensures that you know where failure is. If you're following a program and say you mess up and you accidentally start at 7 RIR because you just don't know better, if you just keep adding weight and a rep every week, you'll eventually hit failure too. And then that gives you information and you're like, oh, well, it took me 7 weeks to reach failure and I really wanted it to be 4 or 5 weeks. So, next mesocycle, I should start at where I was in week 3 or week 4 so that I can then progress in a smaller mesocycle length or whatever it is that they're trying to do. It gives them information. So that's one thing that I've essentially stolen from Mike, to give him full credit. And I use in all of my general programs. I don't program my individuals necessarily this way unless they're I don't really work with novices, but I would probably program a novice somewhat like this just so they can experience failure too. But in all my general programs, because I don't know how all the people following the programs, I don't know how good they are at gauging RIR. I pretty much start all mesocycles at around 3 RIR, and that is my idea. Leave a runway so that you can add weight or reps every week, and then by week 5 or whatever it is, you should run into failure and then start the next mesocycle, and you have more data and you can move forward from there. So I think that as like a general approach of just kind of questioning yourself, like, am I training hard enough? Do I actually know what 1 RIR feels like? Well, hell, just add some weight or a rep every single week and eventually you'll learn. So I think there's a lot of utility there, and that's why I think it's so valuable as a tool in a general program.
Was there another side to that? Or no?
No. I was
Okay.
I just wanted, yeah. Did I sell it like there were two sides? Because I was just going to say,
In the
like, I want to give
beginning,
Mike credit
yeah,
for this idea, because I think it's very valuable, and I think it teaches people where failure is. If you don't know where failure is, it's a great tool to figure it out.
I agree. And like, full disclosure here, with my own training, I'm a much bigger fan of adding reps as opposed to weight, because in my personal experience, it's difficult for me to gauge how much weight to add. And if you're kind of changing two variables per week, I really like pushing reps. And then once let's say on rep, the first session I do something, I get 8 reps. And then up to like the 4th session, on that first set, I'm getting like 12 or 13. I'm like, okay, it's time to add weight. And then I generally will like increase, like, I don't know, 10% or whatever is a decently reasonable increment based on the available increments of weight to add, right? If you're doing dumbbells, it's generally 5 pounds, maybe 10, depending, and kind of start over. I love adding that. I'll work with the same weight for 6, 7 sessions in a row sometimes, and I love it.
So is that purposefully done with the idea of starting with more reps from failure and then gradually working to less reps? Or is that like literally like you're actually progressing 5 reps across that period of time and like your RIR is equal every week?
So when I have like a first set, like a session of a cycle or something like that, I don't want to call it sandbagging, but I'll leave a little bit. I'll leave like 2 in, maybe 3. I want to see where my recovery's at, make sure my training design is actually intelligent. And then, to be completely honest, so this is somewhere I wouldn't say I disagree by any means, but I have just found it different for myself. Like, I can push to 1 RAR. I will push 1 RAR for sometimes like 6 weeks in a row. My fatigue doesn't really accumulate any more than it was previously, and then I can literally, give it. I generally will repeat a session about 7 to 8 days whatever. If I did it like Wednesday, it might be like next Friday, right? So I think that's 9 days or something like that.
Yeah.
Later, I can push to 1 RIR and squeeze out usually another rep to 2 reps. Usually 2 reps on the first set, and then if I'm following a little bit of that DDP, it might be, like 1 extra on sets 2 or 3. And I will push that for really until I stop, or if I, want to change my training cycle a little bit. But this is kind of getting into the next topic we have here, but I just personally recover very, very well, and fatigue generally does not accumulate too much. Like, I can think of only like 2 times in the last year of training where I felt like I really needed a deload that wasn't, mandated by moving in my lifestyle. And that one was when I was doing that 3 times per week leg training, which was just a shit ton of volume, and I would get sick every single Saturday. And the other one was just a lot of intensity techniques. But whenever I'm usually just generally following like straight sets, I find that my body does recover pretty well. But because I do a lot of recovery type stuff.
Yeah. No, totally. I think that's why I said that I think this approach, the Israel style approach, is best for like a general program. But for like myself, and usually I would say when I have individual clients and I can actually learn them, the process usually involves there being about an intro week where we're at like, 2 to 3 RIR for intro week, kind of what you mentioned, like just feeling out the movements. And then after that, we're just like 0 to 2 RIR pretty much the rest of the way through, and just trying to progress with similar fatigue metrics week to week. So So I agree. I don't see any reason that you need to or should do the Israel approach. I just think that it's great for a general population in that it ensures that at the end of every mesocycle, there's a period of assessment where you know what failure feels like.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree completely. Anything else on that one?
Nope.
Cool. Moving into number 6. You're not recovering or eating sufficiently to support the adaptations that need to take place for your legs to grow. And the easiest one here is like I find when I'm starting new clients like I am right now, a lot of people's recovery is just poor. To be completely honest and frank, people do not sleep sufficiently. There's still this large fear of carbohydrate, especially people slowly migrating from the functional fitness paleo type of community into kind of what I would consider Brian and myself are like hobbyists to bodybuilders, I guess you could say. And that's one thing I find. It's like that is how I used to be that person. I know because I was that person who I didn't eat carbs and I slept 5 hours per night. And there was, I didn't know that drinking alcohol after a leg day would impede my recovery and all these things. So like, I know because I've been that person. And now I'm on the other side of that fence and I know how massively I can change my recovery period, my length to recovery, and how in that directly kind of points to how much volume I can handle and all these sorts of things because of these other aspects that I do the other 23 hours outside of the gym.
Yeah, I mean, recovery is obviously the secret sauce. Like, that's literally why in physique sport, like, you're incentivized to essentially just train and then sit on your ass. There was a saying when I was coming up in the sport, I guess you'd call it, in the late 90s, and somebody told me, he was like, "You listen, young man, if you want to get big, never sit when you can lie, never stand when you can sit, and never walk when you can stand." And I was like, "Yes, sir, got it." So that's what I tried to do. But there is kind of like some information there that we can glean from that, in that everything that we do outside of the gym is impacting our recovery in some way. Whether we're enhancing our recovery by like eating well and sleeping well and de-stressing and all those things, or whether we're causing recovery issues via poor sleep, additional exercise, stress in life and work and marriage with kids. I mean, all the things that happen in life. So I think that the important thing to understand is that we can do everything in our power to optimize recovery, but recovery is difficult to optimize in certain conditions. I think even using myself as an example here, right? So I just changed my leg training to go hams every 6 days and quads every 6 days. So this is significantly lower frequency than I was doing, and I didn't really increase my volume. Maybe the reason I had to do this is because my recovery isn't great. So there are things that you can do with your training if your recovery isn't great. In my situation, I am 13 or 14 pounds down in a diet. I've been dieting now for 2.5 or 3 months. It's relatively long to be in a caloric deficit, right? There's a stress on the body there. There's probably a stress on the mind, even though I don't really feel the diet to be that difficult yet. I still have to consistently restrict things that I actually really want or kind of want. But there's a cost to that. I'm having to walk a lot to help me burn calories and stay in a deficit. And even though it's just walking, when you're doing 15,000 steps some days, that also has a cost to it. So I think that these are all things to kind of take into account. And then when you put all of your recovery currency on the table and you realize that maybe you're not recovering optimally, A, you can do things to help yourself recover optimally like Aaron talked about. But B, if you're just in a deficit and your recovery isn't optimal right now, then you just need to be aware of your volume and frequency and probably manipulate those variables so that they fall into line in your program in a way that fits your life and allows you to kind of still fit in quality sessions where there is progression or maintenance of strength occurring.
Yeah, I really like that one. Anything else on number 6?
No, I think that kind of transitions pretty well into the last one, though, because I mentioned, walking. And so the last one is you're cardioing away your legs. Plus kind of associated fatigue costs and impact on recovery and performance. So this is very much in line with the post that I put on Instagram the other day. That was an equation for fat loss, where I basically talked about how the key to losing fat is walking and lifting, because cardio comes with a larger fatigue cost, like typical cardio, and it's more like intense form, right? Whether you're doing like HIIT intervals, or you're going for like a 20 or 30-minute run, or you're mountain biking or some sort of other something like that, there's going to be a fatigue cost associated with that. So A, you're causing fatigue. B, you're putting yourself into an energy deficient state, where now you need to eat more to compensate for that energy that you exerted. And C, you're actually potentially going to impact the quality of your lower body sessions, which is the thing that actually builds your muscle. I don't think that this is as much of a concern if you're keeping your cardio 24 hours before or 24 hours after your leg session. I think that would be probably a sweet spot where at least you're not going to really cause a huge issue. But I still believe that any fatigue that you're putting on your legs, like this goes back to the thing, like if you can walk, or don't walk if you can stand, and don't run if you can walk, and don't sprint if you can run. I mean, you can go all the way down the chain, and like the more intense that you get with your movement, the more impact that's going to have downstream on your performance and on the ability of your body to hypertrophy your legs.
Yeah, I think that is a really, really big one, especially, I mean, you see so many people on the stair mill and doing all these things that they think are necessary. And it could be one last little angle, it could be a little bit of a comparison of your goals, right? If you are in a fat loss phase, it's probably worth saying you're not going to be growing that much new tissue on your legs. It's a trade-off, right? Mm-hmm. Opportunity cost on what your goals are. Because when it comes to like recovery or fueling a cardio session or whatever, it is a competition of resources. And however you prioritize where those resources get like allocated within your body is really going to be slightly beneficial for your, obviously fat loss, slightly beneficial for your leg hypertrophy goals, but just knowing that there is that trade-off, and you have to decide what is most important to you in the next, 3 months or 2 months or however long your periodization is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can even, though, kind of play a little devil's advocate to that and say that, like, if you're doing a bunch of cardio instead of, like, if you're doing a bunch of higher intensity cardio versus lower intensity cardio, even though your goal is to, like, yes, you're trying to take your body weight down and you understand that you're not going to gain muscle in your legs, you could potentially be risking muscle in your legs. And a perfect example of that is my physique competition from 2015, where I went into the prep for that competition basically squatting like 400 for a triple or something around that. And then by the end of my prep, which was, 12 or 13 weeks later, I put 225 on the bar, did it 3 times, and felt like I was going to die and racked it. So I was doing cardio, right? He had me doing cardio 4 or 5 days a week. I was doing like HIIT intervals and like steady state and walking and like all these things. And my legs shrunk. And I can definitely say that, like, in that moment, it didn't matter because I was doing men's physique. And I think that was kind of the idea, is like, you only have to show your upper body, who cares? But what it did is it taught me some really valuable information, that doing cardio makes my legs shrink. And I think that while I am an N of 1, I have seen that same thing occur across the board with tons of other people. And so I think it's a real thing. And if you're going to be in a deficit and understand that you're not going to be building muscle, you should be trying to protect your muscle. And so cardioing away your legs is a real phenomenon that we should probably avoid.
I 100% agree with everything you said.
Cool. Dig that.
Yep, especially with the higher hit stuff, because resources, and no one's really doing as much you're not really doing your cardio with your arms, right? It's being done with your legs, and then you can catabolize that local tissue for energy substrate. So yeah, really 100% spot on everything you said.
Dig it. Well, I think that's the episode, man.
Yeah. So guys, I think this is a really good one, Brian. I think we were able to provide a lot of value on some takeaways that we've learned over the years, and now how we are benefiting on the other side. Our legs are finally growing. I don't feel as ashamed about them anymore. Hopefully you feel the same way. Maybe we'll do some more episodes like this that really break things down from what we found. So as always, guys, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.